Every professional has a unique magic waiting to be discovered. At Finding the Unicorn in You helps you unlock your hidden potential. Thank you for tuning in. Now switching it over to our host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Finding the Unicorn in You. Today, I have an individual who is known as the Gay Leadership Dude. He is an expert in diversity and inclusion, change management, and leadership. He's worked internally for folks like Walt Disney Company, IBM, Tupperware Brands, and several universities before starting his own consulting firm, Top Dog Learning Group, in 2008. The Top Dog works with both Fortune 500 non-for-profit organizations to bring about more inclusive and effective workplace through on-site workshops, virtual or face-to-face keynotes, one-on-ones, and group coaching sessions. I'll let him talk a little bit more about himself and introduce himself. So without further ado, welcome Dr. Steve Yacovelli.
Thank you. It's a very big pleasure to be here, especially because you have rainbows and unicorns up on.
Oh yeah, all about the unicorns.
Yeah.
Dr. Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what got you into consulting and opening up your own firm?
It actually started, again, Dr. Steve Yacovelli, pronounced he, him, and his. And I got in this path earlier in my career when I was actually working at Disney. I spent several years as an internal leadership consultant with Disney Cruise Line. So talk about a sweet travel situation. I go on board the ships, teach people leadership stuff, and then come back and go to the island. But it was very early in that experience. And the woman whose job I was basically taking, she was moving on to other projects. We were on board one of the Disney ships and we're walking around. And she's like, "Hey, we should have dinner." I'm like, "Okay, it's a ship. We're on here for 7 nights. We're going to have dinner anyway." She's like, "Let's." So we end up going to the spa, which of course is co-ed, which, side note, if you work in the cruise industry, it's very weird because you see your coworkers in bathing suits a lot. It's just the way it is. But anyway, we're at dinner. And we're in the spa, and she's like, "We should start a business." I'm like, "We have jobs. Matter of fact, I'm taking yours and you're moving on." So no, we should start a side hustle. And so we went to our, at the time, leader, the EVP of HR at Disney Cruise Line, and we told her the deal. And she said, "Thank you for sharing. Don't use Disney stuff. Don't use Disney time, and have at it." So that's how Top Dog was formed as a side hustle back in 2002. So that long ago. Life progresses. She works her way up the corporate ladder and ended up retiring as like a senior VP of blah, blah, blah. And I bop around. I leave Disney. I start doing some other things, finish my doctorate. And then I end up at my last corporate job. And after about a year and a half, I'd won this fancy glass HR Executive of the Year award. I got fired. And to this day, I still have no idea why. Florida's a right to work state that as long as it's not a protected class, that can happen. Unfortunately, there's other states like that. And so I was like, "Oh crap, what am I going to do?" And as irony would have it, Ruth, the same person whose job I took, who's still one of my best friends to this day, she was my mentor. She called me up and she's like, "Hey, I have some big news for you." I'm like, "Funny, I have some news for you." So she came over and my husband made us dinner. And because I had two partners, I had my husband and her, who's my business partner. And she's, "I'm moving to Paris for 3 years to run Disney University." I'm like, "Fantastic. So what's your news?" I'm like, "I got fired today. I have no idea why." She's like, "Come with me." "What?" "So come with me." I used to be fluent in French, and she had this beautiful chocolate lab. And his name is Potter because he had a big scar on his side. And she's like, "You can help Potter be settled in, be the puppy au pair, and then figure your stuff out." My husband's like, "Steven, why don't you go for a couple months, figure your vocational world out? I'll come get you." I'm like, "Score." So I moved to Paris, and that's actually when I took the idea of this side hustle that I was going to do. I'm like, let me see if I can make this a go as my full-time gig. And that started so that was the very beginning of 2008, which was a crappy time to start your own business, but recession be damned. Knock on wood, at least to this day, 17 years later, that's been my jam.
Wow. What a story. And there's a lot of pivots in there.
Yes.
So it's not the conventional, "Oh, I started my business and I thrived." No, there was like a lot of like ups and downs in there.
Yes, I know you've had other folks talking about resiliency, and that's one of the things that over my career, I've taken away to be a very big strength, is to be resilient when change happens, because it's going to happen whether you like it or not.
Yeah. I know you're known as the Gay Leadership Dude. So how did that come about?
Actually, back in 2018, I was at my first National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce conference, NGLCC. If you're not familiar, it's the nation's where you can register your business to be queer owned, and good stuff can happen from that. So I'm at my first conference and I'm sorting business cards outside of a session. This woman next to me doing the same thing. And she's, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, consulting firm, blah, blah, blah. How about you?" She's, "I'm a publisher." I'm like, there's a leadership book in my head. It needs to come out. So let's get that book out. And that's actually who published my last book, Jen Grace from Publisher Purpose Press, amazing group. But during that process of both writing the book, editing it, and then actually she was helping me think about the marketing piece. She said, what's your brand? I'm like, Top Dog Learning Group. It's my business. She's, that's your business. What's your personal brand? What's something that will never leave you? I'm like, gosh, I never thought about that. And that's how the Gay Leadership Dude came about, because I was trying to think through the lens of this book coming out. What, with no pun intended, gay leadership book, but what is my personal brand? And that's where I fell into the Gay Leadership Dude, and it's Circle R, if you can see here, if you're happy to be watching. So I own that. That's my copyright. The only one.
I love that. I love that. So with that, I know that you do a lot of different workshops and a lot of different like group coaching for not only like leaders, but also a lot of LGBT and queer leaders. How has that been for you?
Yeah. So just to take a step back, I like to say at Top Dog Learning Group, our doghouse sits in the center of 4 insanely complementary areas. We focus on essential leadership. So if you're a newer leader, what are some of the skills, talent, strategies you need, tools in your toolbox to be successful that you maybe don't know about? Inclusive or heart-centered leadership. So it's really, how does any leader create that sense of belonging for any person, regardless of where you sit in the organization? And then we do focus on LGBTQ plus leadership, queer leadership. How do you channel your superpower as a queer person to be an even more effective leader? So I like to say leadership through the rainbow lens. And then resilient leadership, as we just talked about. How do you be resilient in times of change, both leading yourself as well as your teams? And we do a bunch of different channels with that. And with many of those, it's training classes, consulting, coaching sessions as off-the-shelf solutions and stuff. And so with our queer leadership programs, it may be our flagship online program, and then there's coaching embedded in that. It could be just a virtual keynote or in-person keynote that talks about leadership through the rainbow lens and stuff. And so it's been really great to see. And I often have people say, what's the difference? Is it a queer leader different than a regular leader? Yes and no. I talk about what I have found when I was writing my book, starting to write my book with Jen. It was actually going to be a pretty generic leadership book. And just because I've been doing this stuff for almost 30 years, and you see a pattern of behavior, what works and what doesn't. So I just figure out my 6 competencies. And then, Hammy, do you remember the Sex and the City show, the original one? Okay, so the original one. If you don't know it, it's Google it. It's on old times. But anyway, Carrie Bradshaw was the main protagonist. She'd open up her laptop during each episode and she'd type in, I couldn't help but wonder. And that would be like the topic of the episode.
Yeah.
So I'm getting stuff together for my generic leadership book. And the little Carrie Bradshaw in me is, I couldn't help but wonder. And because I was watching our queer brothers and sisters and siblings who were doing advocacy work. And I'm like, I couldn't help but wonder, are they approaching leadership a little bit differently or through a little different lens than our straight sibling counterparts? And so, like, to put it in perspective, I was thinking through, I wanted 6 competencies, like the top 6 that I thought of. And so I landed on authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. But now I couldn't help but wonder, through that rainbow lens, what do they look like? Because these are the ones that any leader, gay or straight or anything in between, this makes the difference in your success.
Yeah.
I've been seeing that over decades of doing this stuff. But let's talk about authenticity. If I'm an out gay man, I'm a transgender person, be my authentic self in the workplace, that's power. And that's the power you can channel to be an even more effective leader, because you're already practicing it in general anyway. And that's what I argue in my last book, Pride Leadership, Strategies for the LGBTQ plus Leader to be the King or Queen of their Jungle, looks at these 6 competencies and talks about how, as a queer person, allies like it too, but as a queer person, what does that look like? And how can I understand that I'm being an amazing leader to begin with? And how do I amp that up to get it to the next level?
Interesting. And I agree. All these competencies are needed in order to be a good leader, but they're not easily, it's easier said than done. Sometimes if you don't have some of these, it's hard to develop. So what do you recommend for people who may see, oh, I have 2 of these, but not the rest. Can I still be a leader? What's some advice for them?
Of course you can. And what I like about these 6 competencies, again, if you're not watching, authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture, is, yes, I deal with them in Pride Leadership as well as our training classes and all that stuff as separate different topics. They are so gorgeously intertwined, it's ridiculous. And so, for example, if I'm being empathetic as one of the competencies, you leverage empathy usually with another human. So I'm automatically building relationships by leveraging that empathy. If I'm having effective communication, it's usually not to yourself, it's to other folks. And through the nature of building relationships, I'm helping to shape the overall workplace culture. And I tell folks, If you're good at one or you have one down, fantastic. Use that to help grow some of the other areas because they are like this big ball of string intertwined in a great way.
Yeah, I love that. So I really want to hear your definition of leadership because that word gets tossed around all the time. And people, especially in my field, they are like, I want to become a leader. My goal is to become the next supervisor, the next program director, whatnot. But it's hard for them to define what leadership is. So I want to know in your own words, what is leadership to you and what does it take to become a leader?
I love that you asked that question. And this wasn't really pre-canned, but it's actually in the preface of my last book, Pride Leadership. And it's because of my mom. And I use her as a great example because she was one of the first people to help me really start to think about the concept of leadership many years ago. Now, I'm very lucky to still have both my parents. And my mom, of course, and my dad is since retired, but my mom spent most of her career, a very big part of her career, as a secretary of an elementary school. And my mom, Joyce, ran that school. Now, she wasn't the formal leader. Of course, that was the principal, was supporting that person. But she was the one in charge because, like, a potential teacher or a teacher who was potentially going to work there would walk in, they'd see my mom, and then she would shuffle them into the principal's office, pun intended. They'd do the interview, and then they would leave. And then the principal would immediately come out to my mom and say, Joyce, how did they treat you? What's your take on it? And that always, first, it had me realize never underestimate the power of the admin because they
Oh, yeah.
usually hold the keys quite literally to that organization. But leadership is about influence. It's not about position. And so I argue in all my books and all my classes that you can be an individual contributor. You can be lower on that org chart. You are still a leader. It's about the influence you have on those around you, whether that be on your leveraging it up to the side, to people below you, project team, peers, whatever that looks like. Leadership is about influence, and everybody can have that influence within the workplace.
Yeah. And that there's a concept that I'm pretty sure you're familiar with. It was developed by John Maxwell, the 365 leadership model,
Yep.
where you can lead sideways, you can lead up, you can lead down. You really can lead anywhere as long as you communicate, are transparent, and you're able to all of these one things right there. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's say that we have a person working in, I don't know, let's just say retail. So how can they start being a leader there?
So I think it's looking at how you're interacting with both your coworkers, in that case, your customers, maybe the vendors that you're working with. How are you approaching that relationship with them? So we'll start there. Is it one of sort of an attitude, or is it like, what can I do to make you successful? Because it starts with kind of that mind shift. And what can you do to support others, to empower others? That's going to be the difference between just a service provider versus a trusted advisor. And I'm quoting not my work, but a book called The Trusted Advisor by Masters Green and Galford. Fantastic book on sales, but it's more about influence as well. And service provider, people look at you like, okay, it's a transaction thing. That's it. And when you get to the top of their 4-spot pyramid, according to this theory, when you become a trusted advisor, that's when people seek you out. They may not have work for you. They may not be, oh, I need you to ring this up. They might be like, I need your opinion on something. They may not purchase, but they're looking for your expertise, your perspective, your professionalism to help guide them along. And I think that's some of the shifts that can really help someone get into that leadership mindset.
Yeah, I like that. And there's a lot of little things that you can do. Like you said, there's so many different avenues you can take. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? How can you acknowledge them and then input them in the workplace? And sometimes it is going above that job description, especially if you want to really make a change and make an impact in whatever position you're in. Now, when it comes to leadership, regardless of what position you have, there's always going to come a certain amount of stress tied to it. So, in your position, working with several leaders, what's one thing that leaders can do to ground themselves and regulate that stress?
I love that question. I think leveraging probably one of the most underutilized leadership tools, it's effective listening. Sometimes it's just asking the right questions and just shutting up and being quiet and letting someone share their perspective. There's a quote that I believe it's Stephen Covey often says, we often listen to respond versus listen to understand. And that's a very Western, especially very American, North American perspective. Someone's talking and we're ready to jump in with our perspective, our 2 cents. Don't do that as a way to both chill your own stuff out, but it also gets you time and allows you to let the other person share their perspective. And then you come in and maybe not say, oh, did you do this? Say, That's an interesting perspective. How did that make you feel? You almost use what's called coaching questions to really start to get people talking, because a couple of things are happening here. One, I'm building rapport with that person, so I'm therefore building trust. Yay. That's side note, the secret to every leadership, by the way. You can sum up every leadership strategy in if you build trust with somebody, that's the end game. That's the goal. So you're doing that. So you're building that relationship. You're also hearing, and you're hearing what's being said and what's not being said. And by not thinking about what you're going to respond, but by truly listening, you're going to really start to understand their perspective better and be able to ask really good questions. And the other thing too is humans like to talk about themselves and their situations. So you're making that person on that unconscious level feel good because you're engaging with them. And hopefully it's from a sincere perspective, not just a tick box. I'm going to do this because Steve said it on the podcast. And so it's really helping you. And all the while it's less about you, it's more about them. And that can go pretty far to help you de-stress or not be as anxious in that particular exchange.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And just to take that one step further, I think a lot of the times as leaders, we feel that we need to know all the answers. We need to be able to solve all the problems and that we have to do it alone. But it really is a collaborative, like you mentioned. Every single key player in your team has something to contribute, and you should be open to listening. You should be open to for feedback. I think when somebody talks back to us or they start like giving us advice or, hey, I think this idea is whatever, we go with a sense of resistance and we try to hold back and defend. But like you said, we have to go in with curiosity. What's going on here? Like, why are they pitching this? Can this be better? And then really asking why and peel the onion back.
I love it. You just inspired me to put this model I use in a lot of my classes in my books and stuff. It's a concept people often will use the terms mentoring and coaching interchangeably. They're not. And it's, yeah, preaching to the choir. Yeah. But if you're not looking, if you think of like a grid across or horizontal, you're looking at the focus. It's either on one side, and left-hand side is going to be focusing on a problem. On the right-hand side, it's you focus on the solution. So that's the exchange that you're having with another human. It's either going to focus on a problem, focus on a solution. And then the vertical axis at the very top is your job as that person is to ask more questions, or if it's down at the bottom, your job is to be directive, to tell more things to do. So on the intersection of we're focused on the problem, but I'm telling you what to do, that's counseling. Hey, did you get your resume together? Did you do this? Did you do that? So I'm telling you, even though I'm asking a question, I'm telling you what to do. I'm giving you that direction. When I focus on the problem, but I'm asking more questions as the listener, that's more therapy. Have you ever done therapy? That's what the therapist does, is ask a lot of questions, but we're focusing on some sort of issue or challenge. Now, on the right-hand side, if I focus still on the telling, that's mentoring. So if you're ever in a mentoring situation, that's someone who's experienced will tell you, did you do this type of thing? How have you done this? And so they're still telling you, but it's about maybe a solution, could be about your job success or whatever. But true coaching is where we're asking a lot of questions, but we're focused on the solution, because what you're doing is you're getting that person to come to the conclusion on their own without telling them what you should do, be prescriptive. And I love this model because it just really clarifies it a little bit. Where so many folks, especially do the mentoring and coaching interchangeably. Yes, you can be both of those in one relationship with somebody, but your focus is going to be a little bit different on the asking versus the telling piece.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people interchange these words very commonly, like you said, and it's very different. Like people go into coaching saying, "Oh, I have workplace trauma," or "I have this type of thing," or like, "No, you're focused really on the problem. Go to therapy so you can unwind there." If you have a roadblock and you're trying to figure out how to come to that solution, how to overcome that roadblock, okay, then let's go with coaching. If you don't want to do that inflection work, you just want a do it yourself model, do it for me model, then mentoring and consulting can be more for you. So it just really depends how you want to develop.
Exactly.
No, I love that a lot. So going into more so in leadership, what do you think is one of the biggest problems that holds people back from becoming like their authentic like leadership style?
I think if I go back to the 6 competencies, authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationship, and culture, it probably falls in a couple of these areas. The one would be courage. You can't be authentic without having the courage to be yourself. And I think that's where, depending on where we work, what our workplace culture is, now that we're talking about culture, it could be, do I succumb to the expected norms of what my workplace expects a quote unquote leader to be? For example, I often see people who are more introverted who, Steve, I need to be more extroverted in order to be a leader. I'm like, no, you don't. There's plenty of awesome introverted leaders. Absolutely. embrace your authentic self and your preferences. And you can still lead by being more introverted. They're like, really? But every leader I see, it seems so extroverted. So we all have all those preferences of introversion and extroversion. And you, in certain situations as a leader, might have to lean into one more, but don't change yourself just because you think that's what a good leader is in your workplace. So I think it's things like that that help people understand that leaders aren't a one size fits all. And what I love though is especially millennials and Gen Zers know that a lot better than us in the older generations, I think. And I think that's awesome because that's the way we change the workplace is folks like, no, I am this person and I am a leader and here it is. Yes, be your authentic self. That's the way.
Yeah, you just have to be able to tap in with there and then stop listening to the people around you and stop comparing yourself to the person that you think you should be or you ought to be or you should be. There's this coach that I listen to all the time and she's like, you should never should yourself. Stop shitting yourself. Every time you're in the should mind frame, then you are not being yourself. You're being a version of yourself that is way, way too far from your authentic self.
I had a boss when I was still internal. I asked actually a very similar question to my boss at the time and said, how do I position myself to move up within the organization? And I was pretty high up anyway, but I really wanted to get to that more executive level. And he said, and he just turned and happened to be outside his office window. You could see at the time I drove a new Beetle convertible. I live in Florida and I always have convertibles. And he looks, he's like, see your car? Yeah, it's Nigel, the new Beetle. Yeah, it's pretty cool because I name all my cars. And he's like, I remember this day. He goes, secretaries drive those. And I'm like, what? And he's, yeah, if you want to be seen as an executive, you need to drive like an executive. And I thought that was the stupidest comment I'd ever heard. But it taught me, I'm like, okay, so there's that unconscious bias or overt bias, whether he's aware of it or not. I'm like, okay. But it did teach me a nice lesson. One, I knew where he stood. So I'm like, if you're going to be the hiring manager, I guess I need to buy an Audi versus a Volkswagen at this point. Or what can I do to position myself to be like, no, that's not a leader does not be defined by the type of car that they drive. And that's the level you're at. But what can I do to show that, hey, I am ready for that senior level by the work that I do and the words that I say?
Yeah. And that goes with a lesson that I've always learned. Other people's insecurities and biases should not be yours. So
100%.
when you're listening to advice, ask yourself, is this advice coming from an insecurity or is this advice coming from like a good place of like secure and knowledge? But this kind of goes into my last question about lessons. So what is the one unicorn lesson that you've learned that has impacted you the most and made you the person that you are today?
So I said one of them, which was never underestimate the power of the admin, per my mom, Joyce Yacovelli. But I think it's really back to that whole listening piece. I wish I would have known a little bit earlier in my leadership path, my professional path, to really learn to be quiet. I think a lot of times when we're newer into our professional journey, we want to talk a lot because we want to show the value we can add and the knowledge that we have, especially if we feel a little insecure about the value we can add. And I think it would have been to go back in time and talk to little Stevie and say, you know what, ask really good questions and then be quiet and let the person answer. Because I think it's Ben Franklin who says, either Ben Franklin or Mark Twain, it's better to be quiet and let them asking about your competence than to talk and let them know where your competence isn't, or something to that effect. And it's, especially if you're earlier in your career, just really the power of asking good open-ended questions and then active listening. Oh my gosh, that's a fantastic way to progress yourself and launch yourself into that leadership role.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't have to prove anybody what your talents and what you've learned or what you have. Just show them. Just do what you have to do to be successful. And your work is going to show for itself. You don't have to tell people, I got X amount of awards, I did this, I did that. Through your own work, you'll build a reputation that will show people who you are.
Love it.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, contract you, join one of your workshops or classes, how can they do so?
So you can either go to our main doghouse website, topdoglearning.biz, B-I-Z. You can meet myself, my team, all the books, the training courses, all that fun stuff. Or you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there, one of the little top voice people there. And it's Steve Yacovelli. There's actually only one other Dr. Steve Yacovelli, believe it or not. He is distantly related. He's like an oncologist doctor though. So every once in a while, I get a I'll get a ping from Dr. Steve Yacovelli wrote this article. I'm like, ooh, my Google bot kicked in. And it's like, oncology is the article. I'm like, damn it, it's the other Steve. So Steve Yacovelli on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And for our listeners, don't feel like you have to write all of this down. If you go down on the show notes, you'll be able to get all the links there. And if you go to my website at rainbowcareercoaching.com, go to the Unicorn Wall of Fame, you'll see Steve on there along with a bio and all the links in there as well. Thank you, Steve, so much for everything. And any last things before we close out?
Thank you for that. And thank you for creating this space, Jamie. I think when we go into a workplace and we really want to succeed, I think give yourself some grace that you don't have to do it in the next 20 minutes. I work with a lot of leaders who expect to be launched from that entry level to that VP role in the next year or two. Enjoy the ride. Just love getting to know your organization, the work you're doing, the people that you're working with, clients and customers that you service, and enjoy the journey. It's not about getting to that destination in the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, take your time. It's a process and enjoy the process. There's going to be ups and downs. Just enjoy the ride. Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve, Dr. Steve. And until next time, everyone.